All right, Deanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you who don't know Deanne yet, her name is Deanne Gist, and she has rocketed up the bestseller list and captured readers everywhere with her very original, fun, historical novels. Um, is that right? Are they novels?
They are. They are.
Okay,
You're exactly right.
awesome. Okay, she also has four RITA nominations, two consecutive Christy Awards, rave reviews, and a growing loyal fan base. With $750,000 books sold, her awards include National Reader's Choice, Book Buyer's Best, Golden Quill, Books A Million Pick of the Month, Romantic Times Pick of the Month, Award of Excellence, and Laurel Wreath. She has a very active online community on her blog, on Facebook, Pinterest, and on her YouTube channel. So again, Deanne, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got started as an author.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I think that I never intended to be an author. I had dyslexia when I was little, and so if you had told me or my parents that I would be making my living as a wordsmith, we would have all had a really good laugh. But as it ended up, whatever's going to fuse with dyslexia in your brain, if it's going to, it usually happens at the latter part of adolescence, and it did for me. But when I was a junior in high school, my dad was still reading my textbooks to me. But I was able to get to A&M, and I got a degree in elementary education and graduated. I was on academic probation every semester because of my troubles. Back then, they didn't have disabilities like that. And so you just did the best you could. And I graduated with my 2.3, and there was lots of celebrating. And after that, I was a school teacher and asked, I said, I want the slow babies. I know just what they need. And so I taught, and then I had 4 babies in 4 years and quit. And as a stay-at-home mom, with all those babies, I really needed a creative outlet. And I tried crafting and all of this kind of things, and I ended up being a journalist because I could do that from home. And I wrote for People magazine and parenting and parents and family fun. And those years, Thomas, as a journalist, really taught me how to write like by word count and how to meet a deadline and how to write tight and how to get a thick skin and how to take rejection. And it was a wonderful base for me when I was preparing to enter the fiction world. So I kind of wrote my journalism to support my fiction habit, which was basically where I wrote novels and always wanted to publish them, but by the time I finished that first one, I thought it was just the best thing ever, and that New York would be running down the hall saying, "This is the one." And of course, it stuck. It was terrible. Praise God they didn't publish it. But I learned a lot going from the prologue to the epilogue. And once I had done that, I realized that it's kind of like I knew that I had the rejection letters that I was getting said, this girl can write, but she needs to learn her craft. And so I thought, I'm tired of rejection letters like that, and I don't want to get any more like that. If they want to reject my book because of the time period or because it's not marketable or because it's going to be something other than craft. And I joined a writers organization. I entered contests. I read how-to books. I got a critique group, and we met every Monday and swapped chapters and critiqued each other's groups, and wrote a second book, and that book sold.
Mm, that's awesome. So when was that first book? When did you land your first agent to get that first deal?
Well, I landed that first agent in 1997, but I didn't sell that manuscript until 2005. And so don't be discouraged out there. I tell people that selling a manuscript to a New York publishing house is like finding a spouse. Everything has to be just right. Everything's got to be lined up in the heavenlies. Even like the editor can't have the flu when he picks up your manuscript that day. You can't have a manuscript that maybe has a premise similar to a book that they've got in the works that you don't even know about. There's so many reasons that you might be getting a rejection that have absolutely nothing to do with the craft of your novel, just, you know, especially right now, as volatile as the market and industry is. So I really want to encourage those of you who are receiving rejections to get a thick skin and know that it is not necessarily the craft, and it's certainly not you personally.
Absolutely. That's such a great point, and to not take rejection personally, because it really isn't about you. And like you said, there's so many different factors and different reasons out there. You know, you never know what's going on in that company. I mean, you know, any number of things could cause them to say no to your novel or your book, and doesn't mean that it's not a good book, or that you're on the wrong path, or that you should never have written the book in the first place. It just means it's just no. That's all it means. And so, absolutely. And so, I love what you mentioned, is that, you know, focus on the craft, focus on your skills, focus on what you can do to make your book even better. So what were some of those things you mentioned? You know, all the books you read and the writers' organizations you joined. What were some of those things that you learned that were really big aha moments for you when it came to learning the craft of writing and really improving your manuscripts?
I think one of the biggest things I did was I joined a writing organization called Romance Writers of America. And it does not matter whether you're writing romance or not, because that particular organization teaches you the craft of writing, and they have workshops. They have chapters all over the world: Australia, Canada, United States, Europe, everywhere. And all of those chapters bring in speakers, and one speaker might talk about setting, another characterization, another plotting, another mechanics, another how to do your taxes, marketing, everything. And so if you're not writing a romance, just don't go to the workshops on romance or the sensuality, although it wouldn't hurt for you to go, because even if you have a subplot that has a romance in it, readers really seem to enjoy that. So I found that was the most valuable thing I did, was joining Romance Writers of America. And I signed up to be the tape librarian, because back then we had cassette tapes and we recorded every single person who spoke. And so I had all of those cassettes at home because I was the librarian, and I listened to every single one and took notes. And the other thing, and I think I have it, Thomas, right behind me. Let me turn around. Yeah. As you can see, these are very handy. These are, I would say what you said, Thomas, an aha moment. And this was recommended to me by a speaker at RWA, and it's Techniques of the Selling Writer by Dwight Swain. Now, this is an old book. I think it came out in the 60s, but I think you can see all my tabs, and it's dog-eared, and I have the whole thing highlighted, but it basically talks about the mechanics of the writing. It talks, and I'll give you an example, would be a motivation reaction unit. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a motivation reaction unit. And what that is Dwight says, don't have your character laugh and then say why he laughed. Well, then you've got your motivation and your reaction flip-flopped. What you need to do is have the person tickled and then they laugh. And so you have your motivation first and then your reaction. Because if you get those flip-flopped enough, at the end of your novel, your reader's going to go, you know, the book was good, but there was something off, and they're not going to know what it is. And it just could simply be that you flip-flopped your motivation reaction units all the way through. Those kind of things. So it's little bitty tips like that that end up being really affecting your manuscript. And so that book is like gold. The other one that I love, and this is, I've used this so much I had to cut the spine off and coil bind it. And this is called The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And the first half of the book talks about archetypes, and the second half of the book talks about plot structure. And he is doing this for screenwriters. But a novel can be set up on that same kind of story structure. So he and Michael Haig are the two plot gurus that I really pay attention to, and that really, these are the two foundation books. These are the cornerstones of my career, and I would say that every book I write, I refer to these books as I'm making notes and plotting.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. That's great that you found those books for you, that, and I can see how you light up, your face just lights up, and how excited you get when you talk about them, because that's awesome. I mean, it's like when you find those ideas, those few things that really take your career to the next level. It's so much fun, and it's so exciting, and it can be a total life changer. That motivation reaction unit example. I mean, it's so small, and who cares? But it's a lot of those little small things added up take your manuscript from average to good or great, and that's what you need to land the book deal, to find readers, to attract readers, to build a serious business as an author.
You are so right, Thomas. That was such a great point. I can remember my mom and dad telling me that there is a very small margin between ordinary and extraordinary, and the difference is the work and the attention to the detail and doing your homework. And I'm not talking about school homework. I'm talking about this kind of homework. And so you have it spot on. I totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so that's great. So what about any other tips that you learned along the way, or things from personal experience maybe, or things that you learned from failure, where you got a rejection letter from an agent and it really turned you on and said, hey, I've got to make this change so that I can become better?
Yeah, and I think that most of those epiphanies occurred by going to these workshops. And I would listen to a speaker and I would find out that you couldn't have flying body parts. And a flying body parts would say her eyes dropped to her handkerchief. That is like her eyeballs dropping. Or he threw his hands into the air. That's a flying body part. Now, those are, figures of speech for us. But if you put too many of them, they're also cliches. And there's a better way to convey that emotion. And so I would have to go home and I would go through the 8 chapters that I had written and get rid of all the flying body parts. And then I'd write a few more chapters and I'd go to the next monthly meeting and I would find out some other new rule, like you can't head hop. Well, head hopping is where you are in third person and you're describing the scene, let's say from the female protagonist point of view. And then in the middle of it, you hop over to the male's protagonist view, and you explain it from his, and then you go back to the females, and you explain it from hers, and you hop back and forth. That's called head hopping, and that is done a lot, but it is not near as powerful as if you look at your scene and you decide which character has the most at stake, and you get into their head and you describe the whole scene from their head and their point of view. And if you need to convey what the others are thinking, you do it through body language. So, guess what's right behind me? Body language. Body language. I think back here I have every book there is on body language, because I'm going to put these back. Because these are written for people who are like going on interviews, but it tells you that if you do this, it's going to look like you're angry. If you do this, it's going to look like you're frustrated. If you do this, it's going to look like you're hitting on them. And so what happens is then I use this in my writing when I'm trying to convey what the other characters, their reactions, and a lot of it, what I try to do, Thomas, is visualize actors in a movie. And I say to myself, if I were an actor in a movie and the other character is talking, what would I do to convey my feelings? And I try then and put that on paper.
That's awesome. That's such a great tip, to read books on body language. I think being a great novelist and like creating great characters in your stories is really about, you know, how well do you know people, how well do you know yourself, and how, like the people who are the best observers of human nature, you know, people who sit in cafes and you can watch people and, you know, you can see what their life is like and what their body language is, and you can guess just by looking at them what they're talking about and what that discussion is like. I mean, that's, you know, the skill that it takes to craft those characters compellingly in your novel, because, you know, like you said, if someone's angry in the novel, but you have them, you know, explain that their body posture is one that makes them look like they're happy, that, you know, it really doesn't make sense. You know, people read the book and they're like, what, this doesn't make sense, I don't get it.
Exactly. You're so right. And that's one of those times where they get to the end of the book and they go, well, it's good, but there was something off. There was something not quite right. And that and that may be it. Is just the body language is off. Or you get stuck with the cliches. You know, he furrowed his brows, or he gritted his teeth, or, you know, and the body language gives you other options than those ones that you use over and over and over for nervousness or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Okay, so when you're writing your novels, is there anything else that you refer to? It seems to me like you've got all these different books that you refer to as you're writing your manuscripts.
I do. And I'm going to turn around again. I'm sorry to keep turning my back. This is the book I'm writing that comes out in May. I've already written it. Obviously, it comes out in May. It's called Tiffany Girls. And with every book that I write, I have this binder, and it's a special kind of binder. It's called a Circa binder, C-I-R-C-A, and because it's I can pull the pages in and out. It's like that. And so then I start out, it's real skinny, and by the time I get to the end of the book, it's real fat. But I have a section on characters and plotting, my research, my setting, what we're going to do for publicity, and then some notes. And I'll see if I can open the character section, and I'll show you that, like, in the character section, I will have a characterization chart, and it'll have my character's full name, and it's things like eye color, hair color, body type, are her parents alive or dead, what are their names, does she have any siblings, all these things. And I do that because, believe it or not, you know, it takes me a year to write a book, to research and write it. And so I sometimes forget what color their eyes are. So I actually collaborated on a book with a suspense writer, and it was a romantic suspense, only one I've ever done, and a reader emailed us after the book came out and said, your hero started with blue eyes and he ended with green eyes. It's like, oh no, how did that happen? Because I missed it, Mark Bertrand, who was my collaborator, missed it, the editor missed it, the proofreaders missed it, all these people missed it. So I emailed Mark immediately. He's a great guy. He emails me back. He goes, oh, Dee, don't you remember? His eyes changed color after he fell in love. That's what I told the reader. I emailed him back, and that's what I told him. Which is totally a lie. We just messed up. So now I write it down, and I try and make sure that I don't make that mistake again. And one of the other things that I try to do is I try to keep pictures of the protagonists and the characters so that I can remain consistent. So, like, here are some of the peripheral characters in Tiffany Girls. These are some Tiffany Girls, and this is like the editor, the newspaper editor, and this is the con artist, and so they're based on either tintypes or actors or just people who fit. Like, I needed a Swedish girl, and so this I Googled Swedish blondes. That's kind of scary. You have to be careful when you Google that. You get all kinds of pictures. But this was the one that I ended up using. And then on the side there, I'll pull this out because it's a little bit easier. On the side here, I write a little bit about her. And I've got what her name is, how old she is, how tall she is, what color her eyes are, a little bit about her. And so I do this for the characters so that I can remain consistent. And it's easier for me now if I pick an actor and actress for my protagonist to use as inspiration, because I've seen them in movies, and it helps me to keep that eye color in mind, and the mannerisms in mind, and the body type in mind. So for Tiffany Girls, my inspiration for the female protagonist Flossie is Sandra Bullock, and the inspiration for the male protagonist is Jude Law. And so I remain consistent through that whole thing. And so that would be like the section on characters. And then I have a section on plotting where I make out all my plotting notes based on the questions at the back of each chapter in this book. And then I have research, because one of the my brands, Thomas, is the amount of historical research I do. It is my goal to make my book, I want the reader to feel like they've time traveled. I don't want them to read about the time. I want them to experience the time. I want them to experience New York City at the turn of the century. And in order for me to do that, I have to do a tremendous amount of research. And in the clothing that they wear, the homes that they lived in, what kind of plates they ate off of, what the weather was like, what the streets looked like, what kind of conveyances were in the streets. I mean, everything, the social, economic, political climate, all of it. I spend a lot of time researching.
That's awesome. So how do you do your research today? I mean, I know when you started, I mean, it was pretty much before the internet, right? So back then you were probably going to the library when you first started out.
I was, and I find that old habits die hard, and I still find myself in the library with every single book, but the internet has obviously been a godsend. The thing you have to be careful with the internet is that you don't really know how accurate all that information is, and so I really try to confirm it from at least 3 sources before I'll believe it. Unless there just simply isn't. But I'll give you an example in Tiffany Girls. And let me tell you just a little bit about the book so that this will make sense for you. At the turn of the century, Louis Tiffany, who was the heir to the jeweler, his dad owned the big jewelry on Fifth Avenue. He was an artist, and he did all the stained glass windows. And his big coming out and his big debut was going to be at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And he was building a chapel completely of mosaic cut glass. And about 5 months before the fair, the men, glass cutters, went on strike. And he couldn't finish. And he didn't have time to go through all the negotiations because the fair started in 5 months. So in desperation, what Louis did was he went to art studios, and he hired women art students to finish the chapel for him because females were not allowed to be members of the union. So these female artists cut the glass and finished that Tiffany chapel for him. And it was a big brouhaha, a big scandal. Women can't do it. They don't have the arm strength. They don't have the know-how. And, of course, it undermined what the men were trying to accomplish with their strike. But those girls ended up finishing that chapel, and Louis made a complete women's department, and they became known as Tiffany Girls. And so I fictionalized what happened to one of those girls. And now, Thomas, I've forgotten what the question was. I totally forgot where we were going. Do you have any idea?
Honestly, I forgot too, but I think we were talking about the writing craft and what you were referring to, and you were talking about, you know, your character sketches and the plotting and that kind of stuff.
I remember. You asked me what I do. Do I go to the libraries? And
Yeah.
so what I was going to tell you was kind of my research process for Tiffany Girls. And the way I found out about the Tiffany Girls is a brand new discovery. Actually, Louis Tiffany took credit for all of the iconic lamps that Tiffany is known for, the dragonfly lamp and the wisteria lamp, all these iconic lamps. Everyone, for all these years, has thought that Louis Tiffany designed them, when in fact, we found out in 2005, someone in their attic found a bunch of letters written by the head of the women's department. And she described how she was on a bicycle ride and got the inspiration for the dragonfly lamp when she saw a dragonfly. And she's writing letters to home. And then she goes on throughout these letters to describe just normal things you would tell your mom when you're writing home. But she also continued to describe work, and it was so clear by reading all of these letters that these women, these Tiffany girls, were responsible for designing some of the most famous Tiffany pieces. And so this is a brand new discovery, and it was mentioned just kind of as an aside on a PBS program, and my mom heard it. And she sent me an email, and she's like, "You're not going to believe what I heard." And when she sent me that email, I knew that I was going to one day fictionalize a Tiffany girl. And the first thing I did was go up to the Historical Society up in Queens and read all of those letters that Clara Driscoll, the head of the women's department, wrote. And that is, they were all handwritten, and that was the first thing I did. And from there, I went on to study New York in the 1890s, and when I went to try and find Flossie a place to live, because I needed to know where she was going to live, I found out that there was this big kind of controversy going on about boarding houses. And the reason, Thomas, is because at this time, kind of the nirvana for men and women was the house with the wife and the kids and the white picket fence. And boarding houses were commercializing this. They were making you pay for a home. And not only that, but these single women were living in the same home as single men, and they weren't married and they weren't chaperoned. So it was very suspect. And so I found out that in response to that, what these respectable women would do is they would try and turn the boarding house into a home by having gatherings in the parlor and playing games and having discussions at dinner. And so I had Flossie do that, and I had the protagonist, who's a newspaper journalist, the male protagonist, drove him nuts because he knew, "We're not your family. What are you doing? You're disrupting our dinner. Can we just eat and get this over with?" And that kind of thing. And I read a lot of journals about people who were living in boarding houses. I researched boarding houses. I went to brownstones when I was in New York. I always spend 10 days in the actual setting of my books. I went to the library. I researched, everything, just everything. And so I do a lot of reading. I had to research the 1893 World's Fair and the Tiffany Chapel in particular, and found out that he had sent displays for the women's building at the fair. And so then I start researching what were the displays and which Tiffany girls did them, and I included that in the book. And so it's just all that research. I'll get a little nugget from this one, a little nugget from that one, and a little nugget, and then all of a sudden I have pieces that I start fitting together to make the novel.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So it sounds like you really do a lot of research and really go in depth, and especially like you said, visiting the places, spending time there, going back to the original documents, the original letters. So some really in-depth research. So do you do all that before you even write the manuscript, or do you do your research as you write the manuscript? What does your writing process look like?
Now, and I want to be careful here because my process is going to be different than your process, which is going to be different from her process and his process, and that. So I'll tell you what my process is. My process is I do as much research as I can before I go to to New York City, which is where this one was set, or to Seattle, or to Virginia, or wherever it's set. I do as much research as I can at my Houston library and on the internet and the books I can. Then I go and visit the city, and I have an idea of what I want to do when I'm there. For instance, because I read all those letters, I knew that I wanted to go. I had her address where she lived. Let me see if I can pull this. Yeah, see, I scanned the envelope from one of the letters. Okay, I got her address. I went to 5 West 63rd Street. I went there. And that way, then, I could see what she saw, more or less. And I found out that they spent a lot of times on the roof for relaxation, because there was really no backyard, right? They're in a boarding house. And so it ends up that where she lived is now Holiday Inn Express, and they wouldn't let me on the roof. So I went to the next door neighbor, and they wouldn't let me on the roof. And I went to the next door, and I kept doing that till I finally found someone who took me up on the roof. And when I got to the roof, I realized Claire could see the water from there, and you couldn't see it from the street. And I never would have known that. And so I took all these pictures, panoramic of what her view is, and then when I got back home, I would have it. If I ever wanted to have a scene on the roof, I would have what I needed. Well, ends up, there was no scene on the roof. Was that wasted research? No. You know, it still gave me a sense of where Clara lived and where my heroine would have lived, and what she would have experienced, because that's one of the things you have to be careful with as an author. Is just because you researched it doesn't mean you need to include it in the novel. It's so hard not to include it. It's so hard because you want to share all of it, but you can't, or else your novel not only is ginormous, it also drags. And that's like the kiss of death. You don't want them to ever put it on their bedside table. You want them to keep going, just one more chapter, just one more. So that's kind of the process. I do the research, then I go to the place. Then while I'm at New York or wherever it is, one of the biggest stops is the local used bookstore. And I go to the local section, and I start looking through every single book they have on the shelf about their town. And I read the back of it, and if it's in the right time period and I think that it would be useful, I buy the book. And then I have them ship them all to Houston because I've flown. And then when I get home from that trip, I have boxes of books then that I have to read. And by the time I'm through reading all of those, I may have found out that there was a heat wave that killed a whole bunch of people, or there was a fire, or there was an earthquake, or there was an Indian massacre. Not in this book, but depending on which one I'm researching. And I'm like, okay, if there's an Indian massacre during this novel and I don't mention it, that's kind of a big gap. And so all of a sudden you start finding plot points for your plot, and I build the plot, and only then do I start writing.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So it sounds like you've got a great process that works for you, and yeah, like you said, I mean, the writing process is going to be different for everybody, but I love your process and the way that you shared it, because it sounds to me like you've got this really good balance between, like you said, doing the research, going there, going on the roof. That's got to be a hoot to go to all these different building owners and ask if you can go on the roof in New York City. So that's one of the fun things about, being a writer and learning, like you said, not taking rejection personally, is, it gives you the confidence to go around and do things like that and have those really cool experiences. But basically, like you kind of balance that, in-depth research with, like you said, not putting everything in the book, not boring the reader with details that, maybe your great research uncovered, but really don't have anything to do with the novel, the storyline, or really interest the reader. I think a lot of writers, especially first-time writers, we want to put everything we know into the book. Every idea we have, we think is a good idea just because we had it. And the truth is that not all ideas are good ideas, and sometimes you have to be selective about which ones to read out, to leave out. And I think it sounds like you've got a really great method and process for doing that wisely.
And one of the things that's helpful for me, Thomas, is that critique group. Author Meg Mosley has been my critique partner since the very beginning, and I think she joined me with my second book. And Tiffany Girls will be my 11th. It comes out May 5th. And so she, every week, when I would send her a chapter I would write, she would critique it. And she would say, this is an information dump is what we call it, because we just want to give you all this information. And she's like, no, this is it's got to be generic to the story. You've got to involve it with the characters. You've got to see it through their eyes. It's really a delicate balance, and it's so hard to leave it out. But that is where a critique group really helps. And I find the best critique groups when you're starting out have at least 3 people. Because if there's only 2, then what happens is one person tells you, oh, no, I don't think you need that. And if you don't have that other voice, that second voice to say, oh, that was my favorite part, then you don't know. But if they both say, yeah, then you know. And so to me, Meg and I are mature enough in our writing now to where I really trust her. And so if she's not going to say it unless it really needs to be changed. And so she's my only critique partner. But having 2 or more. Now, if you get too many, that's like having too many chiefs and not enough Indians. You have to make sure that it doesn't get too cumbersome. So, and you also, even if both of them say no, you know your book. And if this is really important to your book, you leave it in and see what your editor says. And then if the editor says no to, you got to suck it up and take it out. It just is what it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, so you have this critique group, and it sounds to me like it's different. So a lot of people, sometimes people have writers groups, and you'll have like, you send out your manuscript to 10 or 15 people, and you all get together and discuss it. But it sounds like what you do is much more intimate. It's a much more 1 or 2 or a small group of people who are really reading every chapter of your manuscript and giving you feedback. Is that as you write the manuscript, or is that once it's totally published?
I do it. Meg and I do it as I write it, because if this has happened to us both actually, where she'll receive one of my chapters and she'll like, I don't even like your male protagonist anymore. He was so unheroic right here that I quit rooting for him. Now, Meg would say it's so much sweeter than that, but I've got such a thick skin. I just tell it to me like it is. But I want to know that, Thomas. I don't want to get to the whole end of it and find out I lost him in chapter 6, that they quit rooting for the male protagonist. I need to know that at chapter 6 before I write chapter 7. So it is really, for me, important to get her feedback as I go so that I can go back and rewrite chapter 6, which then changes 7, 8, 9, 10. Because when you rewrite that and you change his motivations, the ripple effect lasts the whole rest of the manuscript. So I would never write a whole book, and I know you're not supposed to say never, but I would hope that I would have enough sense not to write a whole book without getting any feedback. No, it's every week, and it's every chapter.
That's awesome. So how did you find your critique partner, your critique group, and how do you keep that going? I mean, a lot of people find, I know I found personally, like when you have beta readers or other authors kind of reviewing your work, sometimes they just get burnt out and they say, I can't do it anymore. I'm busy, or things happen, life gets in the way. So how did you find those relationships, and how do you keep them going and keep them nurtured?
What a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, Thomas, because it's a really important question. And I found my critique group originally, my first one, through RWA. And it was 2 unpublished authors, but because they were in my chapter, and sometimes you would do some sharing of stuff. I had read their stuff before, and I could tell they knew their craft. They had been at it longer than I had, and they lived close by, and we could all meet on Monday mornings. At that time, remember, I had 4 kids when they didn't have children at home. So they came to me, and we met at my breakfast room table, and we all exchanged chapters, and we would read them the week before we met. So we would meet and talk about the chapters we read last week, and then we would each hand each other our chapters from this week. We would go home, read each other's chapters, critique them, meet again at my breakfast table, and do those. And that's when they would say, you head hopped here. You got your motivation reaction unit backwards. There's a flying body part here. And then maybe they had been to a workshop that I hadn't been to, and they would introduce me to a whole new rule. It's kind of like Michael Jordan being the best athlete ever, but he still had to learn the rules to basketball. You can't play the game until you learn the rules, and you have to learn your craft. And I say you have to. There are people that are throwing things up there that have not learned their craft, but I feel that it's super important to be the best of the best that you can be. You need to invest the time that it takes to learn your craft, and that critique group will help you. That said, maybe the critique group you're going to know right away you're not clicking with, or maybe especially women, Thomas, get into this problem. There's, trying to think of a nice word.
Drama?
Yes, drama, thank you. I was like, the word that was coming was not appropriate. So, yeah, it can be drama and jealousy and petty and snipping. And you know what? You don't want that environment. And you don't want to be in an environment where you can't give your honest opinion, that the only thing they want to hear is how great their chapter is. Because you know what? If you get 100 on the test, that was no test, was it? You only are tested if you don't make 100. So if you're in a group and somebody in there gets upset, and so now everyone's walking out, get out. Get out. You don't have time for that. Your time is too valuable. And so you try another critique group, and you just keep trying. Meg and I found each other because we joined a blog that was run by an editor. And her posts, when she was just posting, were so well written, when she was just writing on the fly, that I was like, this girl's really good, and I wonder if she's in a critique group, because I was looking for a new one. And I just emailed her, and I said, I've been on the same chat and blog that you've been, and I was just wondering if you're in a critique group, and would you like to, if you're not, would you like to be in one with me? And she's in Atlanta, and I'm in Houston, and now, because of the internet, we don't have to sit at the breakfast room table. So she and I exchanged chapters over a year before we ever even met.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, and if she, and so like right now, my book is coming out and I'm under the gun, and she's not at a point where she's writing her chapter, so we're not meeting every week. Sometimes we meet every week, sometimes we go for months and we don't meet. It just depends on where each of us are in the writing process. But I've just been fortunate, and it cuts down on the drama I found having these virtual ones. But now you can have like a Google Hangout where you can all meet together if there's more than one. So it's really your possibilities for critique partners open up a lot because of the way the internet has made it available to exchange work and have face-to-face meetings.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Great. And so I just want to touch on that one last question, is like, how did you nurture that relationship with Meg, and specifically, and how do you keep that going without getting boring or repetitive, or one of you getting frustrated with the other one and quitting?
One of the things that I found with Meg, and the things that drew me to her, was her strength is my weakness. My weakness is description and poetic type of writing and beautiful phrasing. If all I had to do was write dialogue, I could deliver a manuscript 3 a year. But they expect prose going in with the dialogue. And that's where Meg is such a beautiful, literary almost, writer. And yet she keeps it a commercial. I kind of like to say I drag her down and she pulls me up. It's like when it gets too literary, I'm like, okay, can we have some dialogue? And then she'll like, can we stop here and like, where are we? Are we like, what does it smell like? What does it look like? And that's another thing that Meg's really helped me with. She's like, when's the last time you've used all 5 senses? And that's one of the things I learned in RWA, and that Meg is so good about, is that's one of the things that pulls your reader into the pages and helps them experience it, is by tapping in to universals. The smell of a lemon makes their mouth water. If somebody bites into a lemon, it'll make your reader's mouth water. Or so all the 5 senses: the taste, the smell, the sight, the hearing, the touching. The hearing and the sight are easy. Okay, it's the touching and the tasting and the smelling that are so hard. And you can't overdo it, but you want to bring that in. And so those are the things that Meg helps me with. And so because her strength is my weakness and my strength is her weakness, that really helps solidify our relationship, and also because there's no jealousy, not with either one of us. And we both really want our work to be the best it can be. And when you push the egos aside and you really want the best for your book and your work, that's when a critique partner and a critique group will last, when the egos aren't involved and when the players really want to improve.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. That's absolutely such a great point. And it sounds to me like you both absolutely love what you do, and you're committed to it. I mean, like the amount of research that you do, and you know, when you find someone else who's like committed on that same level you are, that really sets the bar incredibly high, it's so much fun to work with them. You know, it doesn't feel like work, right? It's more like play. It's because you get to, like you said, you know, her weaknesses are your strengths. So when you're critiquing her work, you get to use your best strengths as a writer to help her become even better. And you know, when you're using your strengths on a regular basis, that's when you feel the best. You're in flow. You're having the most fun and excitement doing it. So it sounds to me like it's just a perfect relationship.
It is, and not only that, because I critique her, I'm seeing her strengths, and it's teaching me as I'm reading. I'm like, how did she think of that metaphor? Did she get that really fast? Or it's like me, I have to like think, you know, and so I learn like how she, just from her craft, just from studying it every single week, because I'm not just reading it for pleasure, I'm studying it because I'm critiquing it, and so I learn from what she does well.
That's awesome. Great. Well, Deanne, you shared a wealth of wisdom with us today. Thank you so much. Before you go, tell us where people can find out more about you and your books.
Well, the best place to find me and stay in touch is at my website, which is iwantherbook.com, and I use that because my name, Deanne Gist, is so hard to say and spell, and so it's just easier if you just go to iwantherbook.com and you'll find me. I have a really active blog. I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/D's Friends, and D is DEES, Friends. I'm on Twitter at Deanne Gist. Pinterest, I have a Pinterest page for Deanne Gist. And so a lot of the social media, but the best thing to do if you really want to stay in contact is sign up for the newsletter. I don't bombard you. I just let you know if I'm going to be in your part of town, or if like one of my books, like right today, well, probably not by the time we air this, but if one of my books comes on sale for 99 cents, I let my people on my newsletter know. And so I do special giveaways for them. I give them insider information. So really, the signing up for the newsletter at iwantherbook.com is the best way. And then you can always email me too. So, and I'm not as good about getting back promptly on those emails because I've got these pesky books I'm supposed to be writing. But I do my very best, and I do read every single one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Deanne. I really appreciate it.
I had the best time, Thomas. It was so much fun visiting with you and your viewers.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.